why for me was always about trying to put the best technology in front of students, when actually what I should have been asking is, how is this going to impact on teaching and learning?
Being able to do this for the teaching and learning, and it's not just the device, it's about the teaching and learning that you're going to do in your classrooms.
The technology should allow them to be able to kind of share their learning and their understanding, their ability to ask questions and stuff in a way that works for them.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Empowered. My name is Ricky Brown and I'm an Apple Professional Learning Specialist at Sync. Today I am joined by Martin Higgs, Digital Transformation Lead at Truro and Penwith Academy Trust, and Abdul Chohan, Vice President of Learning at Showbie. Welcome Martin and Abdul. Today we'll be discussing the reasons behind embarking on a digital transformation. So Martin, how does realising your why help Mats with their digital journeys?
I think why is probably the question that I got most wrong throughout the 20 odd years I was ahead, and it was only fairly recently I understood that the why was the key part of the puzzle, because the why for me was always about trying to put the best technology in front of students, when actually what I should have been asking is, how is this going to impact on teaching and learning regardless of the product? And so I think why is a good starting point, really.
Brilliant. And can I ask the same question to you, Abdul?
Yeah. Again, I think, like what Martin said, I think why is probably the starting point for most journeys. Like, why should we be doing this? What's the reason? And so on. And I think for me, it really boils down to this: every teacher, every student, every classroom, every day. And that's really where the why kind of needs to be. And if your why doesn't connect to that, then you really should be kind of questioning, like, what is it that we're doing, and what's the reason for investment, time, effort, energy, and everything else that kind of goes with it. But those are the things. Coming back to that, every day, every teacher, every student, every classroom.
And I think we will come back to it, but consistency in your approach and what you do is really important. I'm just going to pull it back to something you said about being able to do this for the teaching and learning, and it's not just the device, it's about the teaching and learning that you're going to do in your classrooms. Do you want to expand a little bit more on that for me?
I think I'd fixated for years as a head teacher trying to make the best possible provision for students, and part of that was about providing some kind of IT device, whatever that might be. And certainly I've been working with Apple products since about 2005. We were in a fortunate position when lockdown came in that we'd already got one-to-one devices, and we were seen as being really empowered to be able to shift to home learning quickly. Actually, the reason I was asked to do this job by the CEO, I think, was because our school, amongst the 34 in the trust, was probably in one of the strongest positions to do that. The reality is, by the time lockdown came, we weren't in a great position to go to home learning because we hadn't got the infrastructure ready. We had the devices, but we'd never really thought about the best way of utilising those devices for teaching and learning. I always felt as a head I was probably getting 5 or 10% of what the devices were capable of. So for me, the teaching and learning strand of our digital journey, which should have been the easiest part because that was my background, was the hardest part. Because I didn't actually, until I listened to this man actually on a podcast, and it was genuinely that, sat in my room, in my office when I was still ahead and doing the digital job, and there was a podcast that was being run, the title of which was something to do with transforming teaching and learning using iPads. And I was listening to it, doing a bit of work at my desk, and the more Abdul spoke, there was a kind of light bulb moment where I started to realise the why was about how you actually going to change the things you do. Digital transformation is about using technology to improve what you do. And I think I'd seen technology as an endpoint as a head, which it never was.
And I think we've chatted before, and I think this bromance from that podcast has been really, really helpful. But again, I think if you want to expand a little bit more on that, Abdul.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's kind of interesting, right? if we just park education to one side at the moment and you kind of start looking at enterprise, right? So if you look at Ford, what's the product? It's cars, right? And you look at any company, typically we ask what is the product, and we know what the product is. In education, the essential question is, what is the product in education? What is it that teachers do? What is it? Why is the reason that schools are set up and so on? And for me, that comes down to learning. That's our product. So technology has this power to impact three things. One is that it can reduce, it can create time efficiencies, it can create cost efficiencies, and the third thing that it does is it actually develops people's skill sets to become more productive. So for me, it was very much kind of looking at how technology can kind of play this role of increasing the productivity for education, which is learning, in these three areas: time efficiencies, cost efficiencies, and developing people. Now, if you develop people and you invest in people, the ability to teach, the ability to learn, assessment, feedback, marking, all the stuff that teachers do every day in every classroom with every child, these are the things that really should be kind of getting affected. So a lot of my conversations and a lot of my discussions and my past experience is really very much been around impacting that, because that for me kind of tells you whether actually there's been an impact. What we've done at this end, actually it's come out at this other end, and yeah, we can see impact. Otherwise, I kind of sometimes refer to it as gym membership. You know, we pay for a lot of stuff and then we don't use it. And schools are full of that, right? You know, we can walk around schools and, you know, whenever I say that to teachers, there's always a smile on their face, because you know what? Like the number of times we invest in things, we buy things, but people don't use them. You know, or they don't use them, or there's so much CPD that needs to be done. It's so kind of niche product and so on. But there are a lot of gym memberships. And my kind of, I suppose, personal crusade is really very much about getting rid of these gym memberships, and whatever we invest in actually creates productivity and the product, which is learning.
And I think you are right. It's this impact of what's coming back from it. And again, asking that question, why is this having impact? Or if it's not having impact, why are you doing it? It still comes back to that. I want to still keep on this impact question, because can you tell me a little bit more, Martin, about the area they're from and why this is going to have an impact on that area? And
yeah, so Truro and Penwith Academy Trust spreads across the length of Cornwall, which, if you know Cornwall, is a long, thin county. So from its furthest westerly point, our furthest school west is probably Cape Cornwall School, a fairly small secondary, all the way up to Liscard. You know, it can take you 2 hours to drive from one end to the other. So as a trust, we're fairly disparate geographically. In terms of the county, people think of Cornwall as being, you know, the place everyone wants to move to in a relocation programme, as being the place you remember from great holidays, where it never rains, ever. And the reality is, as a county, it's pretty poorly funded per head through the state system. In schools, we've got a lot of unemployment. There's a lot of disadvantage. You know, the school I was head at for 10 years was in the most deprived 8% nationally. That's part of our trust. The school I was head at for another 10 years was in the most deprived 20%, and that was seen as one of the more affluent schools. So there's huge levels of deprivation. And I think one of the things that's driven me with this, because I'm not techie at all. I'm not really. I like the idea of what the technology can do, but I'm not techie. What's driven me, I think, partly is the idea of putting the best possible provision into the hands of the students in our demographic area, because Cornwall is a disadvantaged area in many respects. There's lots of affluence, but there's huge pockets of deprivation. And I love the idea that one of the tools to give our children the best start possible is the iPad, when put in the context of a good teaching and learning model. I spend a lot of time talking to parents and to colleagues that this isn't an iPad project. This is a teaching and learning project, and that's really important. And it's going back to what we were saying earlier, that was something I didn't really grasp as a head. It's the so what question you always get asked. You've got iPads, so what? It could become a vanity project very quickly if you're not careful, that in 5 years' time you're doing something else. one of the great things about this is from the ground up. It's not something that's come from DFE. It's something that's looking to address a need. And that need in our particular demographic is about giving the children the best chances they could possibly have. I came up with the name Advantage for that very reason. We spend a lot of time talking about disadvantage. I wanted this to be something that is an advantage. And when you're giving brand new iPads out, and it's not an iPad project, but from the student's point of view, a cellophane wrapped, factory fresh iPad in a box to students who would never ever, some of whom would never ever have that experience, is transformational, because you're saying, actually, we're giving you the best learning device on the planet, and we're giving you the tools to do this. Now it's down to you. That's a very genuine, tangible, we value kind of message. So there's more to it than that, a lot more. But from the student's point of view, it's about saying, we need you to be the best learners you can be, and here's a tool to start you. It's about saying to the teachers, this is a tool that's going to enable you to teach and learn in a better way, using the kind of things, the DNA of learning that Abdul talks about, going back to those fundamental principles of direct instruction, independent practice, assessment, feedback. How can this tool improve those key factors?
I mean, just the word advantage just means so much, doesn't it? I mean, there's an advantage in school, there's an advantage for teachers, and there's an advantage in the workplace after school. You mentioned the DNA of learning. Can you expand on that, Abdul?
Yeah. So, probably over the last 7-8 months or so, been kind of recalling a lot of my travels to different countries, different kind of schools that I've visited, and so on. And quite often, when you travel a lot and you go to different countries and see different education systems, different schools, you speak to different teachers, I don't know, there was a part of me that was kind of looking at how things are different. So if I went to a school in India, I'm comparing that with the school in Sweden that I went to, and then the other one that I kind of went to in Australia, and how are they all different, and what are they doing that's different, and so on. But over the last 7 months or so, I started to think about, the concept of every student, every child, every day in every classroom. And I started to look at what are the things that are absolutely common regardless of where you go. So what is the essence of education, fundamental thing that every teacher is doing in every classroom every day with every child? And there are lots of things that teachers do, fantastic things, but from a pedagogical perspective, I started to kind of distill this down, and kind of came up with these 4 strands that I kind of called the DNA of learning, because I started to kind of think about, what do I name this? And that's the name that I came up with. And they were exactly what Martin said. And that's really what our conversations have been, the work that we've been doing together at TPAT. It's not about, hey, what do we do with the iPad today kind of thing. It's actually been more around the research-based approaches that we know has significant impact on children's learning outcomes. So, for example, direct instruction. How do we do that in a much more efficient, in a much more time-efficient, cost-efficient manner, as well as how do we develop teachers' skills to be able to do that more effectively as well. So we applied that kind of approach to direct instruction, to independent practice, and giving children that equitable access. We all know as teachers, if I've got 30 students in my classroom, differentiation is not just high, medium, low ability. I've got 30 different kinds of learners. And some might have dyslexia, some might have dyspraxia, some might be gifted in talent, whatever it is, you've got 30 different kinds of learners. And the technology should allow them to be able to kind of share their learning and their understanding, their ability to ask questions and stuff in a way that works for them. And I think that what technology can provide from that perspective is quite key. So independent practice, then assessment and feedback. I did some podcasts, funnily enough, about a year ago or so with Dylan William, with John Hattie. We spoke about, the impact of these huge areas, education endowment fund, looking at their research and so on. So integrated assessment and personalised feedback is part of this. And one of the things that we've been able to do at Showbie is to kind of really focus on these 4 areas. So part of our work around the DNA of learning with Martin and the Advantage project has really been to kind of skill teachers up in doing these 4 areas that are not rocket science. Teachers have been doing it for a long time, but how do we do that with technology? So it's less time, more efficient, and has significantly more impact in terms of the way in which students can kind of, interact and so on.
I think what's really interesting from that is as you said, it's the core stuff that's going on. I think that every teacher believes that teaching should have all of these 4 strands within them, and nobody will argue against that. And I think belief is a big point of this.
Huge.
When you're actually moving forward. I know that when we've talked, Martin, you have a belief in what you're now doing, and don't get me wrong, you were going to retire, and this actually changed that, didn't it?
I thought I had retired, actually. Yeah, so after 35 years in education, 24 as a head, I decided to retire, and I was doing this digital job for the trust part-time while still a head. And I couldn't carry on doing both, so I decided to carry on with this. When I started out on this digital transformation job, I didn't even know what digital transformation was. I didn't have a clue. I was asked to do it, as I've said, partly as a result of lockdown and my school being a reasonably good place, and our CEO, Jenny Blunden. I have to say, it was a brave decision, really, to go down this route, because it's not a wealthy trust at all, and it's not a wealthy area. So to go down this route was Jenny's, I think, vision of trying to do something different to give the young people in our schools the best possible opportunities, and just to change things up, because education hasn't changed that much. I stand in classrooms now and I say to parents, what's changed really? A classroom that I first stood in 1989 is not that different to a classroom I stand in today. Yeah. Interactive whiteboards, which is an issue in itself.
Gym membership,
yeah, are there. Nothing else has really changed. The process, as Abdul has said, the DNA of learning hasn't really changed. The same principles are not likely to change in education, because that's the way we work and the way young people learn. Yeah. But actually, something has changed, because the world's turned upside down in terms of digital technology. It's true that every young person in a primary school in Cornwall now and across the country was born into a digital world. That's all they've ever known. It's increasingly true that teachers coming into schools, particularly ECT teachers new to the profession, are similarly expecting to come into a workplace where there is a digital aspect. And it feels as though education kind of missed out on a whole section of digital change. For whatever reason, it feels to me, from about 2007, wasn't it, the first iPhone? Yeah. Coincided with the crash, I think, with austerity starting around that time. I can't. It feels as though when I first became a head in 2000 and we created an IT suite, that was probably the closest I've gotten until now to be at the cutting edge of technology. Without a national digital strategy in place, schools went off in their own direction. If it was important to the school, they invested in it, but with no real guidance.
Something that you said earlier, talking about belief. Yeah. So typically speaking, quite often what I've seen with change, any type of change that happens in an organization that's at this level, leaders will often you'll get leaders that will just say, right, everybody's doing this. Then people do it, but they do it out of interest because, I still need my job and that's what they want us to do and so on. So that's one way of trying to create change. Will it stick? Do people do it because they believe in it? Probably questionable. But if you are able to change people's belief, then their behaviors will automatically change. If somebody believes that actually I can go in and do an explanation on trigonometry, and as I'm explaining it, it's going to be recorded and I can make it available to kids and they can see it and every time I do that, it's going to work. Then what happens is that the impact from belief to behavior is going to happen, because the belief is actually this stuff's going to work. And one of the things that actually changes belief in my experience, especially with respect to digital transformation, is simplicity and reliability. These two things are so essential that actually, if something is not simple and it's not reliable, then the belief that it creates is this might not work. And if it's not going to work, then guess what? I'm not going to do it. And I think one of the things that we've experienced in education for a long time historically is technology has not always been simple and reliable. And, that then doesn't kind of create that belief that actually I can change my behavior because everything's going to be okay. And I think that's really quite key. So a lot of the projects that we've been involved with in terms of like from a Showbie perspective, but also, you know, working with Teapot and Martin's team as well, is we've always made sure that whatever approach, system, process, whether it's to do with assessment, feedback, direct instruction, research-based approaches, the simplicity and reliability is there. Because that's the thing that creates shift. That's the thing that then creates change. Then we can really begin to kind of try and solve bigger problems like consistency, you know, which is a big, big issue. Yeah, getting consistently good, right, is the challenge, you know. But without these foundational things being there, it's going to be a struggle, because creating a critical mass of teachers who are saying, actually, this is the direction of travel, becomes very, very difficult. So sometimes you have like some people do it, some people don't do it. The trust has spent a lot of money on that whole transformation thing. It's not really picked up in the way that they've kind of expected it. But actually, simplicity is not there, reliability is not there. It's not changed belief, therefore it's not changed behavior. You know, it's been introduced as an iPad project rather than an actual learning project. You know, the core elements of what teachers do on a daily basis, assessment, feedback, direct instruction, have not even been addressed. You know, so it becomes an add-on thing. So I think there are opportunities with digital transformation to kind of overcome these things, because lots of great trusts have done that. I know Martin's teachers, phenomenal. That journey has been amazing, kind of watching that transformation. And now, like, even innovation. I was speaking to one of the head teachers, was it Dan?
Dan Simons, yeah.
The other day, and you know, as far out the schools, the distance might be far from school to school, but they've kind of created their own environment in Showbie where teachers are recording best practice around direct instruction, around assessment and feedback, and they're able to upload the videos. Other teachers can watch that, you know, and they can kind of see best practice and so on. Typically, that would be CPD, getting people together. Again, time efficiencies, cost efficiencies, and the fact that teachers are prepared to share what they're doing becomes significantly powerful in terms of how we can kind of grow and become better at what we do.
I think just if I can bring that down into two simple things, I think there's a belief that this is all about teaching and learning, and there's a belief that it's going to be simple and easy to use. It's a bit like, for me, it's about what's in it for me as a teacher. Mm-hmm. What can I get out of this? But it's still delivering the core purpose of what we actually want. I want to bring that thought process into something that you said before, Abdul, about you said you've been around the world, and I know you are. It's so hard to catch you now and again. And you said that there's like loads of things that we do the same. But when you've got maths and you want schools to be able to have a little bit of autonomy in what they're doing, does that change, that difference?
Yeah,
cause a problem? I
think you know what? Like, I've never been to a school that's the same as any other school, right? Internationally, I'll have gone to a British school and another British school, and every school is different. It's kind of like, I suppose, fingerprints, right? They're similar, but they're still very different. Every school has its own identity, its own people, its own organization, its own atmosphere, and so on. I would probably say that for many mats, that's also true as well. So as much as you might have a mat identity, but as you walk into different schools within that mat, every school has its own identity as well. And what I'm also kind of feeling, I can't like 100% put my finger on this, but even when you introduce like principles that are like rock steady foundational stuff like assessment and feedback and direct instruction and so on, and it's in the iPad environment, and you've got Showbie, and you've done the training and so on, even then teachers add their own style and their own flair to this. You know, every human is different. You know, we are a product of our kind of experiences, right? So we kind of begin to explore and see different things in different places. So like, for example, what I saw when I had the conversation with Dan and sharing that best practice stuff, I've not seen that before happen in a Showbie environment with iPad and teachers sharing best practice and so on. So that is a learning, and that's something new that's kind of come out of that. So I think those kinds of things, that's what kind of really gets me fired up. Like, okay, we've kind of talked about the basics. You know that these are, basic things. We've shown you some really simple and reliable approaches to the way in which you can do this. But then when you let schools loose and they kind of start playing with it and they start doing their own thing, they then create their own identity in terms of their own language that they're using, in terms, in their approach, their structures for quality assurance and how they measure things, looking at impact, their approach to the community. I've seen one organization in Showbie, they invite businesses from the community to come in once a week online on Showbie, and they coach the children on what they're doing. So that's something that I didn't think about. It's what that school came up with. So I think that kind of individual identity element and the innovation that comes out of this is really an interesting area, and I love kind of looking at that with trusts.
I think as well, Abdul, on the back of that, our own trust is formed on the idea that schools retain their unique identity. Ours isn't a trust that is a one-size-fits-all trust by any means, and that's why I think a lot of the schools opted to join it, and we wanted to retain that. But actually, I think one of the powerful aspects of the Advantage project is, and this movement generally, is that we've gone into it from the point of view of setting these 8 expectations, but me saying to head teachers directly, I need you to give the teachers the freedom to experiment. I need you to give them the freedom to get this wrong, because for as long as I've been involved in education, it's been driven by fear. Rightly or right, well, wrongly in my view, but my view is it's been driven by fear, and fear doesn't promote innovation. Fear promotes a fairly conservative approach. Do what you need to do. It's been the number of U-turns I've seen in terms of what good teaching and learning is supposed to look like through various frameworks of whatever organisation happened to be looking at it is ridiculous. And actually, this project is saying, right, these are the 8 expectations. They're around the DNA of learning. Work towards these, embed these in your classroom and your practice. They're fairly straightforward and simple. They'll enable you to work smarter, students to learn better, and then build on that. Do what you need to do that works for your students. Do what you need to do that works for your style of teaching. And if you get it wrong, you get it wrong. It's fine. It's not the end of the world, and nobody's going to come in, which is why I'm talking to the heads. Nobody's going to come in and tell you that you've made an absolute mess of it. But be reflective and learn from that and work together. So for within our trust, as I said, we're pretty disparate in terms of geography. So having been able to train staff across the 34 schools by using our 3 core apps, and the 3 core apps are Showbie, Explain Everything, and Socrative, means that we're starting to talk, having the same language, whether you're in the far west or the far east of the county. And what's really strong for our trust is we've not been able to do that before. It's not possible to get all the teachers in one place after school for a training event unless it's virtual. If you're going to do that, then let's have a common language where we're all trying to do the same thing. Let's have a common set of training expectations, and then you build from those. And that, for a trust like ours, is really important. I think for any trust, to give, because I've never yet met a teacher who doesn't want to do a good job. The problems we've had is, I think we got to a point in education where people didn't know what a good job looked like. It was somebody else's definition of a good job. And actually, this is about saying we want our young people to be able to benefit from digital technology, and teachers to benefit from digital technology, to do stuff we couldn't possibly do without a one-to-one device environment. And all we're saying is this is the scaffold to work within.
Yeah, I think one thing that's kind of really I suppose it kind of tickles me sometimes when I think about it, in some ways, that we, like, in the UK, 80% of a school's budget is typically spent on teachers, right? So state-funded school, money comes in from the government, 80% of that in most schools is spent on teachers. Okay, that's fine. Teachers have the job of explaining new concepts and ideas and teaching in the classroom. That's what they do. They go in, they teach a concept and an idea and so on. Okay, that's fact. We know that. The third fact is that research tells us that actually when humans, not just children, when humans are taught something, when we're learning something new, most of that is forgotten within 2 or 3 days, right? So like you learn something new, and that the whole forgetting curve from Ebbinghaus and so on, we forget most of the stuff. So that kind of translates to us spending 80% of our budget on a process that's going to be forgotten in 2 days or 3 days. And that is kind of, I suppose, funny in some ways, but then teachers have to find ways of how do I capture that gold dust. And that's the thing for me, right? And this is where I feel technology can play a role, because there are simple tools like what we've done with Showbie and our focus around that. A teacher does an explanation live in class, explaining a concept, an idea. That's the gold dust. That's where your 80% is going. Of course, there's marking under the bits and bats are going on as well. But actually, that's that modeling, that explanation, that's the gold dust. The fact that technology can capture that with the teacher's voice and the pen strokes and the explanation, and in a simple and reliable way can make that can be made available to students. You tap export, hey, turns it into a video. It's not going to ask you 20 questions about what file format, where do you want to save it. Like, it's not like that anymore. And the fact that it will end up in every student's like Showbie workspace, so that they can watch that and listen to that as many times as you want. And then coming back to the idea of differentiation, and everybody's different, and some might need to listen to it 2 times. You've got some students whose English is second language. They might need to pause and look up a word. The fact that you can just do that, like literally within seconds, kind of seems like, if that is not being taken advantage of, it's like a massively missed opportunity, you know. And I think that's what I mean by that kind of changing that belief thing. And the more teachers that we've kind of done this with, you know, like we've done the DNA of learning with literally every school in the trust. Like, not once has a teacher come back and said, nah, actually this is too much work. You know, they're coming back and saying, actually, you know what, this is a lot easier than what I was doing before. I explain, my background's a chemistry teacher, right? So I'm like, here's periodic table, group 1 metals. I've done put loads of energy into explaining this, and I'm asking questions, and yes, it looks like the kids have got it and there's no misconceptions. 2 days later, kids come back in and I'm asking questions and they haven't got a clue what I'm talking about. And it feels like I never even taught it, you know. But the fact that we can make that available, the fact that children can go home and watch that as many times as they want, that's retrieval practice. Mm-hmm. Whereas actually sometimes we're spending time on homework where, you know, education endowment fund, other place saying homework doesn't have as much impact. It's actually better if they were to watch that. Yep. You know, many times over.
I think what you've talked about in all of that is the belief that it's going to work, the belief that it's going to do what you need it to do, the belief that teachers can do something that isn't going to take them so much time, like recording what they're actually doing when they're doing the direct instruction, which can then be there, and it's going to make a benefit to the students. All of that is really, really important to get that message across. And where you're talking about before, you had eight core things that you want to do. If you have that core purpose behind you, you're not saying that it has to be done this way, that way, whatever. You're just giving them good structure to what you actually want with that delivery. And if I can bring one of your phrases that I've heard you say before, being different is what brings us to be the same.
Yep.
I think that is quite powerful with when you're actually mentioning about any trust about what they're going to move forward with. So Martin and Abdul, thanks very much for the conversation we've had so far. What I'm interested in now is what's next for Advantage. Where can you see this going? What's the future looking like? Martin.
Okay, so we're just about to start rolling out to all the secondaries. Our project is year 5, 6 across all the primaries, so that's 28 primaries plus an infant. It's going into secondaries. So that's on the ground. That's the biggest thing. I think what's really interesting about this from our perspective, you know, again going back to the geography of where we are, it's easy to get isolated in Cornwall. It's easy to feel as though everything's happening elsewhere. And I think one of the great things which has made this project exciting for me and for the people involved is it ties us into a national, international network of educators. You know, the fact that we get to work with people like Abdul, particularly people like Abdul who's touring the world and seeing how this stuff happens and helping it to happen is really key. It also, the fact that we sit on this digital leads forum that Apple have put together is interesting for me, because it does feel as though the job is a fairly new one, and the challenges we're facing are new. Almost as though you're the first people to come across these kind of things. And I know we've done some work with Showbie and with Abdul about trying to overcome some of the challenges that the software was presenting us with, some of the limitations. And that's actually led to changes to the software, which have enabled us to do things differently. And that was to do with Socrative and quizzes, using quizzes. And I think the software initially meant you could only have 5 editors on a quiz. And we were looking to have a library of quizzes across the trust, with 60 or 70 teachers wanting to access them, and all being editable. So they changed the program to mean we could do that. And that feels as though you're at the leading edge of something. You're not following a path that's been well trodden, which is full of challenges, but is also really exciting. And it ties me personally as a digital lead into a network of people doing a similar job. And because we're not on each other's doorsteps, the collaboration and the sharing that's gone on has been fantastic. Arthur Terry, for example, Learning Trust have been amazing they're slightly ahead of us in the journey. They've been amazing in sharing things with us. And there is that sharing and community aspect to it. So as far as what's next for the Trust, I think it's rolling this out, it's embedding it, it's making sure that we put things in place to enable it to continue to grow and develop and not be one of those projects, as I alluded to earlier, those hundreds of projects that wither and die and disappear and people forget all about. This has got the potential to change things long term, and we need to keep building and developing that.
And I think what you're talking about is keeping that core belief of what you're trying to do and move that forward. And it was really nice to hear that Showbie are quite reactive to what teaching and learning needs, and straight from the coal face, if that's a point. So what's next for Showbie then?
I think it's for us at Showbie. I think where our next steps are is continuing to kind of look at aspects of the DNA of learning, so direct instruction, assessment, feedback, independent practice, and so on. But then looking at simplicity and reliability. How can we further simplify? And we've done things like integrate Socrative into Showbie now, so you can be in Showbie and you can run Socrative straight from there, ask questions in real time and get responses back and so on. So further simplification. Integrating things like AI, but in a way that's kind of smart. So now this is a beta version. I'll share this with you now. But one of the things that we've done more recently is that when students submit content and work and so on, and teacher typically gives feedback, we know feedback, how good quality feedback can accelerate learning by 6 months, 7 months, and so on. So what we've been able to do is to kind of look at Hattie's findings on feedback, build that into the algorithm. So if a teacher gives feedback and says, "Hey, well done," right? The algorithm will now come back, the AI will come back and tell the teacher, well, actually, you should be giving feedback like this. And it's suggesting and it's coaching the teacher to say, it's not doing it for them. It's because that's the thing, right? AI, there's a lot of things out there that is just doing it for the teacher and it goes out there. But we still want that QA element. We still want that human element. So it'll come back and it'll give prompts around what should be included, what are the next steps, what have they done well, what steps should they be looking at to make this even better, and so on. So it's things like that I think, like, the Showbie team's fantastic, really smart people there that are kind of working in the background to kind of make this happen. But really that focus around meaningful learning, that focus around kind of continuing to improve direct instruction, independent practice, assessment, and feedback, literally the DNA of learning, is going to be something that we will continue to work on.
I think that's really interesting, because what you're talking about there, it's not just about the students, it's about the teachers, and I know we'll all say that we're all learners, and we're 24/7 learners, and we'll carry on being learners till we die, really. And I think that's the thing, that what we're talking about is, can we continue that back to consistency? Back to what
Absolutely.
we're actually doing, consistency in a very simple and easy way. I mean, I've really loved this conversation, and I could probably talk to you for hours, but I'm going to ask you one last question, if that's okay. Well, two last questions that we can actually do, and I'm really interested on allowing the viewers to listen to some things that, a little bit of insight of where you've been. So I would like to ask you, and I'll start with you first, Martin. What's one success and one challenge that you've faced?
I think the success, the pivotal success point for me was, I'm loath to say this with him sat next to me, but I will. I think was listening to that podcast, was that realization that this isn't about the device, it's about how you're going to change your core practices in the classroom. And that sounds obvious now, but it wasn't obvious to me for years of being ahead. It was about putting the best device you could get in front of students and teachers, without ever really understanding what it was I was trying to achieve with that. That transformational stuff, and that did come from listening to that one podcast. So it's probably fitting that I'm talking about the power of the podcast in a podcast. But it was, for me, it was a real light bulb moment. I think the first challenge was across the 34 schools, with an infrastructure that had evolved over years and years and years, very piecemeal infrastructure in terms of the computer setup, was that what the simplicity that's needed and the reliability that's needed to make, as Abdul's talked about, to make this work, just wasn't there in some of the schools. We've got schools in Cornwall who barely got decent internet connection. So, the great thing about iPad is that we just need a good Wi-Fi network. We don't need lots of complexity, but you need a decent internet connection. You need decent Wi-Fi. And I think in a school, in a trust of our size, 30-odd schools, you need a good ICT support team.
Abdul, what's one success and one challenge that you've faced?
Okay, so I'll go with challenge first. Okay. So for me, the challenge has been that, and this is a challenge in education, is good schools are consistent and outstanding schools are consistently good. So the success has been looking at how do we start with consistently good. And for me, that success has been the DNA of learning. Having those conversations, that's the starting point. Assessment, direct instruction, independent practice, feedback. How do we really make a difference there?
Last question then. Last question is, what is your one top tip for anyone that's going to go through a digital transformation for their school, Matt? Martin, starting with you.
Don't fixate on the device. I mean, iPad is a fantastic device, and most of the trusts that are doing this are using iPad. Focus on what the device can do. It's an enabling tool, and that's what it is. It's the mechanisms that sit inside it that link it to the teaching and learning that are the key things.
That's perfect. Brilliant. I mean, this is just a tool. It's a tool to help you move on, isn't it? It's an enabler. It's an opportunity to change teaching learning. And I'm going to ask you the same question, Abdul. What is your one top tip for any Matt School trusts that are looking at digital transformation?
I would say that for that transformation to happen and to manage that change, focus on changing beliefs, and it will automatically change behaviour.
Brilliant. I love that. I love that belief will change behaviour. Yeah. And we've talked about being consistent, making it simple, making it easy throughout this. And I think, thank you very much for this conversation, both Abdul and Martin. I've really enjoyed this conversation, talking about teaching and learning and education, about technology and how it can actually enhance what you're doing. And best of luck with the Advantage project and with the developments in Showbie. And can I thank you all for joining in for this episode of Empowered.